Good morning. Welcome to HART's regular board meeting. We call this session to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay. First order of business, we have the approval of the minutes. Can I get a motion for that? Second. I have a motion from Mr. Miller and a second from Mr. Melendez. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Next up is public input. We have one name listed on our sign-in sheet, Mr. Cloyd. If you could come forward with your public comments.
Good morning, board. Good morning, board members. Gary Cloyd, 1402 East Chilkoot Connect, Tampa Bay. This is in regards to the premium transit feasibility study. I feel that within the next 18 to 24 months, this will give the Tampa Bay region the information that they need to move forward with every aspect of transportation. Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the public who'd like to speak at this time? Yes, sir. If you could just state your name and address when you come up here.
My name's Tom Rass, unincorporated Pinellas County. I didn't sign up because I thought your public comment was at the end of the meeting, but thank you for moving it.
We have at the beginning and the answer, so.
Well, thank you. So that's
Go
great.
ahead.
That gives me a chance to say what I want to say and then take off. I wanted to speak in support of renewing the contract with Attorney David Smith. My interaction with him on the issue of renewing or of seeking an Attorney General opinion possibly on whether HART is authorized to lobby. He's shown that he's a transparent, fair player. And the reason I'm talking about it now is because I also want to talk about that issue briefly. As I've indicated to Mr. Melendez, I'm just looking for it to get voted on. If you vote no, that's fine, but I want it in the record how you voted. I would argue that you should get an opinion. An opinion is free to you. Mr. Smith is not opposed to getting an opinion. This issue keeps coming up with agencies again and again. Are you authorized to lobby? Mr. Melendez made a great point about the difference between lobbying for money from Tallahassee and lobbying for Tallahassee to increase our taxes so you can get more money, and he can elaborate more on that later. We had a good conversation this morning. But I think it's an issue that you should vote on, and that's why I'm here. It keeps coming up for various agencies, and again, I support the renewal of Mr. Smith's contract. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else, a member of the public who would like to speak at this time? Okay, I see no one. Next up is our Employees of the Quarter Awards and Recognition. Ruthie Reyes-Burkhardt, if you could please come to the podium.
Good morning, Ruthie Reyes-Burkhardt, Chief Operating Officer for HART, and I am proud to announce the Employees of the Quarter and Employees of the Month that we have for you today. So for our first representative, we have Stores Customer Service Employee of the Quarter, David Orona. Mr. Orona is not, in fact, I just want to give a little preface. We only have one of our employees here with us today, but I wanted to let you see who they were. I don't know if you received a copy of their picture. If not, we'll pass those around shortly. Mr. Orona is hired on March 3rd, 2014. Mr. Orona has become a valuable employee of the parts inventory area. He is constantly receiving compliments, kudos from the maintenance technicians and supervisors. He said that he enjoys his job because it gives him the opportunity to work with some great people and a chance to work with a great leader like Al Burns. He's married and with 3 children, one of whom is serving our country at this time, and I'm sure Al Burns did not write this for him. Joe Delgado, our Teamster of the Quarter. He is our Streetcar Maintenance Supervisor 2, hired on August 23rd, 1999. Joe has been a major asset to the streetcar division. He started out in the bus maintenance as a mechanic. Joe also worked for New Jersey Transit Maintenance Wave Department, specializing in the repair of heavy-duty machinery used on the right-of-way. Joe returned to HART and became a maintenance shop supervisor before moving over to head up streetcar maintenance shop, where he is in charge of all maintenance activities, car track, and the overhead power system. Joe enjoys traveling when he isn't at work. And for reference, Joe is not with us today as he's on his honeymoon. He was just married this Saturday. So congratulations to Joe. James Michael, Operator of the Month for January 2016. He's currently a streetcar motorman, hired November 25th, 2002. He was hired initially as a bus operator and has been a streetcar motorman for 13 years. He really enjoys people and says it is fun to operate the streetcar to meet new people every day. James served for 3 years in the U.S. Army as a helicopter mechanic crew chief in Frankfurt, Germany, receiving the U.S. Army Commendation for excellent service. He also received the Safety Award from New Jersey Transit and had previous HART Employee of the Year award. He's married with 2 children and loves traveling, fishing, and watching football. Congratulations to Mr. Michael. Dennis Giles, Operator of the Month for February 2016, was hired on February 28, 2005. Dennis enjoys interacting with his passengers on a daily basis. Mr. Giles returned in 1996 from the U.S. Army as an E-8 First Sergeant in the 1st Infantry Division, aka the big one, the big red one. After 22 years in service, he is the recipient of 5 Meritorious Service Awards, 4 Army Commendation Medals, 6 Army Achievement Medals, 7 Army Good Conduct Medals, a National Defense Medal, and a number of other badges and ribbons. He enjoys video games, auto shows, and hosting parties. He has 3 grown children and 1 grandchild and enjoys hunting, shooting, skeet, and trap, as well as fishing and boating. Congratulations, Mr. Giles. Letitia Jones, Operator of the Month, March 2016. Van operator Letitia Jones has been selected for March, was hired on February 18, 2013. She says that her favorite thing about this job is the opportunity to help someone. It doesn't hurt that she also loves to drive. Operator Jones worked at Tampa Bay Academy prior to being hired at HART, where she was awarded the Employee of the Month recognition 3 times. She enjoys reading, listening to gospel music, and spending time with her family, her husband, 3 sons, and 1 grandson. Congratulations, Ms. Jones. Ricardo Fernandez, he's our Maintenance Employee of the Month for January. He's a master mechanic hired on March 13, 1989. He's received numerous certificates of appreciation and training and has been awarded the Employee of the Month 2 times in 2012 and once in 2014 and in 2016, as well as HART Employee of the Year and Employee of the Millennium. Rick is an active member of the HART Wellness team, and his team of mechanics placed first in both the 2015 and 16 HART Bus, Van, and Mechanic Rodeo. He enjoys spending time with his wife and daughters, working around the home, and following the Tampa Bay Rays baseball team. Congratulations, Mr. Fernandez. Robert Morgan, Maintenance Employee of the Month for February 2016, hired September 29, 2008 as a Mechanic B. Mr. Morgan earned his 5-year service certificate and several Safe Worker Awards and was the Maintenance Employee of the Month for January 2014. Robert continues to attend various maintenance courses to improve his job knowledge and performance. In 2015, Robert's team was 3rd in the Mechanic Rodeo, but in 2016, his team finished 1st and went on to represent HART at the State Rodeo in April. When he was working, he enjoys hunting and fishing. Congratulations, Mr. Morgan. And Mariano Benzo, our employee, is joining us today. Maintenance Employee of the Month, if you would please stand, Mr. Benzo. He's our Communications and Electronics Master Technician, hired in January 4th of 2000. Mr. Benzo began his employment with HART as a Communications Electronics Tech B in the Maintenance Department. Mariano is also the go-to guy in the radio shop when parts or information is needed. He has a Bachelor's of Electronics Engineering Technology. Pardon, my screen went away. Technology. From the Tampa Technical Institute, he was awarded a HART Star in 2004 of October, and December of 2008, he has also been named Maintenance Employee of the Month in 2012 and 14. Mariano has received certificates from the 2010 Award Program and the 2003 Maintenance Rodeo and numerous Safe Worker Awards and training certificates. He also enjoys spending time with his girlfriend, traveling, attending exotic car shows, and going to the beach. Congratulations, Mr. Benzo. And that concludes our presentation.
And briefly, Mariana, can you stand up again, because I can't see you over there. You're not in trouble. I just wanted to say Mariana was one of the first people I met at HART with the holiday dinner, an employee event in November, December of 2009.
Yes, correct.
And so 6 years, 6.5 years now.
Yes.
You've never not been engaged. You've never not been focusing on doing an excellent job and just keeping it running. And you are clearly the work you do makes a big difference. And I would say you're a lot more important than I am because you're getting the work done that people rely on.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, and I just want to say thank you to everybody in maintenance. And like I said, I mean, Jim Fetzer, director of maintenance, and his assistant, Rick Morris. They do a great job. And thank you.
Very much.
Thank you.
Good job. Thank you to all the recipients who have been named employees of the month. I do have one question though, Ruthie. How does somebody get to be employee of the millennium? Mr. Fernandez doesn't look old enough to go through an entire millennia, so I just was curious about that.
Clearly, our wellness program has worked well for Mr. Fernandez. So he's been with us for some time. And I think it was based at the time, and when we get to the next millennium, I'm not sure that we'll all be here to celebrate that. But at the time, he was characterized as our employee of the millennium based on his previous performance efforts and throughout the numerous
Congratulations to him. That's quite an honor. I mean, to get the employee of the millennium, that's a lot. So
he precedes our wellness program.
okay, thank you, Ruthie. I really appreciate it. All right, next up are our presentations. The first presentation we have is an overview of the premium transit feasibility study. Mr. Fogarty, if you're here, and I think after you, Mr. Fogarty, Mr. Booth will continue that conversation. If you could go to the podium, and I guess the staff's going to pull up the presentation. Are you,
I think so, yes. Well, good morning, everyone. While we wait for the presentation to come up. My name is James Fogarty. I'm a bike and pedestrian safety and transit planning expert from college JRB Solutions. I'm here to talk to you today about the Tampa Bay Premium Transit Feasibility Study scoping process. Now, as you all know, transportation is a very hot topic right now in Hillsborough County specifically, but in the Tampa Bay area in general. As such, there will be opportunities moving forward for the region to improve its transit service and capture more of the transportation market with transit in the future. And the purpose of this study is to help us be prepared for that. This is a regional study, and so we've gone through a lot of effort to incorporate participation from our partners in the region. The study area for the scope is defined as the urban areas in Hillsborough, Pinellas, and Pasco counties. Now, the Tampa Bay region is a little bit bigger than that. Generally, there are 7 counties in the Tampa Bay region. So we also want to make sure that the study is clear on how it benefits our neighboring regions, such as Hernando, Citrus, Polk, Bradenton, for example. HART was selected to do this study in part because of the recent success of the Regional Farebox Initiative. HART's been a leader in the region in bringing folks together over transit issues. And so it was a natural fit for HART to be selected to reach out to these folks and bring them together in a regional scope. That said, we are a very large region. Our region encompasses over 2,000 square miles. With several million people. So any kind of regional transit solution is probably going to carry a high price tag. As such, we want to make sure that the door stays open for federal assistance, and that's also a key part of this study. We want to make sure that we're doing it, keeping our ducks in a row, so that if a feasible project is identified by this study, we're able to, if the cost is appropriate and meets federal thresholds, pursue federal funding as appropriate. Just to give you an idea about where we are just at the very beginning of the study. The first step in achieving federal funding is this feasibility study. We have to come to them with a project that we can prove is feasible. Then we get to a decision point. The FTA will review our information and determine whether or not, it's allowable for us to move into the next phase, which is project development. Now, the other component to moving forward into project development is funding. In order to take that next step, the funding for project development has to not only be identified, but allocated and in place before you can move forward in the federal process. So that's also going to be an important component to this study, identifying what that might be early enough that HART or the other players in the region can plan for it and can ask for it as appropriate. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about what's in the scope itself. I'm going to go through an outline of the different sections, and please feel free to stop if you have questions. I want to start with public outreach because that's another very important component of this or any other public study. We want to make sure that anything we do is transparent, and so it is open to the public, that people have ownership in the process. To help us do that, we've asked the consultant to propose a public outreach study that focuses on values. And so we want them to help people tell us what's important to them. Is it travel time? Do they expect a premium transit to be competitive with the car, for example? We want to make sure that the public also has an opportunity to provide feedback throughout the process. We've asked them to, as early on in the project, establish a project website capable of continuously incorporating that feedback. We also understand that people, especially in Hillsborough County, might be tired of being asked to attend public meetings and provide feedback. So we've asked them to also look at ways or strategies that they can not only leverage our public outreach dollar further by attending other meetings that are already scheduled, but also to pay attention to that issue and just make sure that things keep in check. Because the other thing to realize is if we do move forward into project development phase, there will be additional public outreach where we will be coming back to them again and asking them to provide input on whatever project moves forward. So we also, as part of the project, we're not starting from scratch. There's been a lot of work in this area that's already been developed, and we would like the consultant to make sure that work gets reflected in their final product. As part of the situation appraisal, we'll be asking them to review previous plans and studies from throughout the region. And again, there's a long list from plans that have been generated by TBARDA, HART, NPSTA, PCBT, the long-range transportation plans. All of these have a component in terms of helping us understand what's already been done and build on that information to move forward. We also would like to establish early on a purpose and need for the project. That helps us not only stay focused when they're developing and evaluating alternatives, but it's also something that will be required to show if we do move forward in the federal process, they're going to want to see a purpose and need. Further, we want them to articulate the vision for transit in Hillsborough County. What that means is they should, they don't have to create the vision because the vision may already be reflected in the various planning documents, but we want them to articulate it and lay it out so that it's understandable by the public. We want to make sure that you don't need an engineering degree to understand what the plan is proposing. We also need to make sure that the plan stays objective. A very important component, especially for a federally funded project, is that it's not predetermined to be anything. They want to make sure that you're being objective. They want to make sure that what you are proposing is the best solution and that there isn't a better one. So to do that, we're asking the consultant to be very objective. We're asking them to identify regional travel demand. These are things that in large part have already been identified by the various long-range transportation plans. We expect the consultant to bring those together and reflect the travel demand for the region and opportunities where we might be able to capture more of that transit demand with a premium transit technology. That said, we expect them to take that information and funnel it into corridors. So what are the transit corridors? What are the travel corridors for the Tampa Bay region? Many of these won't be a surprise to any of you as you You'll know a very important corridor, for example, between the USF area and downtown Tampa, a lot of travel demand. Those are where our most productive transit routes tend to be in Hillsborough County. And so we would expect that information to also be reflected in the study. We also think it's very important, especially when you talk about economic development and impact to transit, to connect the marketplaces that already exist in Tampa and the Tampa Bay region. These are places like downtown Tampa, downtown Clearwater, and downtown St. Petersburg, as well as several other suburban nodes. These have also been previously identified in information from the transportation management area. And we want the consultant to consider that when they're defining transit corridors and developing alternatives. So that brings us to alternatives and evaluations. To help us stay objective and to help it be transparent, the consultant will identify alternatives for each of the corridors that they tell us have a regional travel demand. We expect them to do a return on investment analysis of those corridors. And that way, they can take a bigger view of the different aspects that go into considering these things. We expect that they can evaluate the highest return on investment for each corridor and carry that forward into a feasibility analysis. So the feasibility analysis, there'll be a couple of different possibilities for results. Again, the project is being very intentional to not predetermine any kind of corridor or technology. And so that will be up to the process. At the end, we'll have a list of projects and their return. We expect the consultant to be very familiar with FTA processes. We want them to have done this before. And so we expect them to be able to tell us either they expect our project to be feasible and they think that it might have a competitive rating in the federal process. If that's the case, then they can help develop a letter and a package to submit to the FTA to potentially move forward into the next steps for the project, assuming that the funding for the next steps has been identified. Or if not, if they feel that the project is there may not be a feasible project, or the projects that are feasible, maybe they're not competitive, or maybe they feel that they could be more competitive in a federal process. We expect the consultant to tell us how the region might be able to make it competitive. And the example I always give, the regional express buses, that's one area where I think that the consultant will probably find that there is a market there that could be tapped, and one of the early action items that the region can do to improve the competitiveness of a potential regional project is increase the service on those express buses to capture more of that ridership. Given that existing ridership is also something that the FTA looks closely at. So with that, I'll happily take any questions.
Any questions, Commissioner?
Okay, so we don't have to mic or just?
No, it is above you. You are
Yeah.
always good.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good report. Glad to hear the direction. I just have a couple questions. Will you be looking at circulator routes also?
Yeah, that's a great question. We've asked the consultant to be complete in terms of how they look at the alternatives, and part of that is
Okay.
how it connects to the last mile. And so in many areas, for example, in some of the more urban areas, that connection might be made by walking. In other areas, especially in suburban areas, you're probably going to need some other kind of connection. And that'll be a local bus service, maybe it could be a circulator. We've left it somewhat open so that they can identify the most appropriate approach for each area, because we're a very diverse region, and that's not going to be the same for each of the areas.
And my second question was, the CSX corridors, does that come into play with you at all in this study?
Yes, I would expect that is the CSX corridors being what was proposed at the TMA by CSX. They came to the TMA and said that they were willing to consider selling that alignment to serve as a commuter rail option. That's one alternative that we would want the consultant to evaluate in terms of what kind of return that would get us, and whether or not that would be a good idea, whether or not it would be feasible for this region, or the appropriate technology for us to go forward.
Great, thank you
So
very much.
other questions? Thank you, Mr. Fogarty, I appreciate it. Jeff Booth is gonna come up and give us another part of the federal process. On your screen, if you just go to presentation, Jay Booth, you should be able to pull that up.
And while Jeff is up here getting set, we had, Jeff comes down to visit us both to do the regular federal legislative update, our annual update, but also to talk about changes to the overall process for the FTA. So the days of doing the alternatives analysis, those are, it's different now. It has been 6 years since we've had those conversations. So we wanted Jeff to come down and do a high-level overview of what are the next stages in the process. So if the feasibility study comes up with a corridor which meets the FTA standards, we know what to expect and what's ahead of us.
I'll wait for it to come up. Just while we're waiting for it to come up, just a little bit of background. I've been working in this area for over 30 years, starting in Portland, Oregon, working on the first light rail project, and chaired the New Starts Working Group for 20 plus years. So I've followed this process over that period of time. So as we go through the process and you understand why that's there, or what Congress is seeking to address, I can certainly help you understand sort of why that change was made or what the effect of the provision will be. But first, we just got done passing the most recent authorization bill last fall, and I would say that while the good news is that we provide modest increases on an annual basis for the next 5 years, we've left ourselves work to do at the end of this bill, meaning that there's a substantial hole in the trust fund that has to be filled in some form or fashion to be able to allow that funding to continue in the years beyond the FAST Act. So I think that's something that everyone's focusing on. Good news for HART is that Congress partially restored the funding for the discretionary bus and bus facilities program. So that program's now available, whereas under MAP 21, it was converted to entirely a formula program and cut in half. Congress has restored some of the discretionary bus and bus facility monies, and you'll see a discretionary program each year going forward for the next 5 years. So it allows you the opportunity to aggregate the funds you need to do a bus purchase or to do a facility replacement or repair project that under a formula program would otherwise have been difficult. And we'll talk a little bit about the change made and the definition of bus rapid transit. Just a brief overview. The program really for purposes of the capital investment grants for what we're talking about today and what Mr. Fogarty talked about, where those projects have fallen into 2 categories, new starts or small starts, and the distinction is really new starts is everything above $300 million in total project cost. Small starts is everything below $300 million. The only caveat for small start is that you're capped at $100 million of federal money. And that was raised in the FAST Act from $250 total project cost to $300 million, and from the federal share from 75 to 100. So there was changes made in the bill to allow additional $5309 for a small start project. It's important also to note for bus rapid transit how it's defined in the statute and how it then falls its way into the New Starts and Small Starts program. And that, I won't read every word. I think the biggest distinction, really 2. Number 1, for a small start project, it is a project that's not in dedicated right-of-way for a majority of the right-of-way. So 50% or more of the right-of-way, if it is dedicated to transit use during peak hour, it's a new start. If it's not dedicated to transit use and shares that lane with an automobile, then it's a corridor-based bus project. So as we're going through the planning process and you're looking at project corridors, you're looking at sort of what is the treatment we want for that corridor, because clearly going dedicated right-of-way increases the capital cost of the project. And so you're weighing the benefits, the travel time benefits of having a dedicated lane versus the ability to provide additional bus service in the corridor, but without the requirement for a dedicated right-of-way, that would be a small start project. The other change that Congress made, if you look at the definition of small starts, previously small starts also required you to have weekend service. Congress eliminated that requirement, and the importance of that is that many communities are looking at express bus service, where they only plan to operate it during the peak hours. And then they really didn't have plans to run weekend service because their market was really the commuter-based market. By making that change now, the Small Start program can be used for corridor-based bus service, where you don't have a requirement to run weekend service, whereas if you're a New Start project with a dedicated right-of-way, weekend service is still required. So talk a little about the process. You already sort of saw a schematic earlier about sort of how this process is, so I won't, Mr. Fogarty talked a little bit about this, so I just sort of lay out the particulars of how each of those processes work. I think the distinction I would make from the top to the bottom, is the fact that you'll notice in small starts, there's no engineering step. So that will become important in a minute as we go to my next slide, but that's the principal distinction. So the work that you'd otherwise be doing during engineering as a new start under the small start process, all of that is done under project development. So there is no two-year timeline for projects that are in project development if you're a small start, whereas there is a 2-year clock if you're a new start. So this is just to give you some idea of what a project timeline would be if you started this summer on a project. And so it gives you an idea that basically the time spent prior to alternatives analysis is really you decide how much time you want to spend sort of developing the project, identifying the locally preferred alternative, doing your stakeholder outreach to identify the corridors. And so that's really where you are right now, is you're starting at that point at the far left of this schematic, sort of looking at sort of what your feasibility is, what corridors arise out of that study that will make sense to sort of carry forward as potential federal investments. So that's really where you are right now, is begin to identify those corridors, do the outreach, determine the feasibility, and decide based on that work that you do, what emerges out of that study that would be a potential locally preferred alternative for one or more corridors that you would want to carry through the federal process, and then look at what's the level of investment that you want to make in that corridor to decide whether we want to chase a new start or a small start based on the level of investment of the project that emerges out of that analysis. And so that's really where you are. And what FTA would want you to do during this phase is really do stakeholder outreach to really identify the best corridors, do some initial analysis of a locally preferred alternative before you actually formally enter into the environmental process. Now, what's also been clear is that they're allowing people to enter into the environmental process prior to formally requesting entry into project development. And they're doing that mostly for new start projects. And my counsel to clients who are contemplating going through this process is if you're chasing a new start and it's a particularly complex corridor, where you have issues in the corridor, either environmental issues, you have major stakeholders like a railroad that you're dealing with, or others that require some time to do the negotiations and could hold up your project from completing the 2-year process to be able to get into project. And once you're in project development, it's better to take that time before you get into project development to do the work to really analyze the corridor, because as a new start, once you're in project development, you're on a 2-year clock. Whereas for a small start, there is no 2-year clock. So depending on the project corridor you're looking at, and the complexity of the corridor will dictate your strategy as to how you move forward in the process. What Mr. Fogarty also said is in order to get into project development, FTA will expect you to write a letter that identifies the corridor, defines the process, how you arrived at that corridor, how you selected your locally preferred alternative, and you have to identify the funding necessary to complete the environmental work to conclude the project development process, because project development is really defined as a new start as completion of the environmental process and identification of a project that you then have rated and evaluated for FT to decide whether you're allowed to go into engineering. Whereas for a small start, you're doing all that during project development, so there is no clock. You are completing the environmental process during project development. There is no engineering step, but FTA is still expecting to get to a higher level of engineering and design before you are allowed to be in the president's budget or to get a small start grant agreement. For a new start project, typically you're going to 35% in project development. However, FTA is also telling communities that if you want to get into engineering, once you go into engineering, that's the number for your project. You own that number. So if there are changes in the project and engineering, generally you own the cost increases. So it's better to do the work early, try to get to a higher level of engineering before you go into engineering, so you have a much better idea of your capital cost to your project. Now the kicker to all this though, is that the work that you do before you get into project development is on your nickel. And it's only once you get into project development that the money you spend is considered local match. And so that's the trade-off you're making as you're looking at the corridors, is do we want to immediately get into project development, but if we're a new start, then we're on a 2-year clock. We may need to take our time before we go into project development to be able to make that commitment. For a small start, there's less penalty to getting into project development because the time you have to spend in project development, there is no 2-year clock. And so I think those are just things as you're moving forward with the feasibility study, and you're working with a consultant to identify your strategy and approach of taking a project through the process, to have those as considerations as you're looking at the corridors, you're looking at the type of project you're contemplating investing in, and determining what's the right category for that project, whether it should be a new start or a small start. Any questions? So basically, oops. So as I talked about this, you want to identify the issues. We want to get to 5 to 10% design. Use this time to build consensus around the corridor, secure agreement on the locally preferred alternative, and then begin to think about your financial plan. So you want to think about where are we going to get the local match. And now local match is not just local county or city dollars, but it's also state funding or private sector monies all count towards local match. So it's just basically non-federal dollars, and even if there are federal dollars flexed to the project, those are still considered local dollars for purposes of FTA. So those are considered local dollars for purposes of calculation, but they still, you are limited. Most projects, if you're a new starter, getting 50%, 5309, that's kind of the threshold. Where small starts, depending on the cost of the project, the lower cost projects are getting a higher level of federal contribution. As you begin to get more expensive, and because it caps out at $100 million, that itself is a limitation on the amount of federal dollars that a small start project can receive. So it's just keeping those in mind as you're putting together your financial plan. So you want to identify 1 or 2 projects you're going to move forward, make the requests as I talked about. I've laid out the steps that are required to make your request to FTA. You initiate the NEPA process. You can initiate that prior to going into project development. It's just communicating with them, getting agreement on the purpose and need, the class of action for the environmental process, whether it's a FONSI, finding of no significant environmental impact statement or environmental assessment. That'll be a conversation with FTA based on the complexity of the project as to what category under NEPA you'll fall into. And then they want to identify where you're going to find the monies to fund that phase. It's complete. By statute, completion is defined by publication of the NEPA finding in the Federal Register, adoption of the project in the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, your long-range transportation plan. And at that point, if you're a new start, your project is rated and evaluated. So part of your analysis, you're doing the feasibility studies, you're taking projects through that process, is you want to do a rating and evaluation of the project to determine competitiveness before you formally request entry into engineering. One of the changes made in the FAST Act was to allow a small start project, once you're completed with NEPA, to go to FTA and say, give us a preliminary rating and evaluation of our project to see how competitive it will be in small starts before we continue to expend local dollars. If this project that we'd like to move forward isn't competitive as a small start project, we kind of want to know that before we expend a lot of dollars after completion of the environmental process. And that was something that groups I lead lobbied for and advocated for, just because wanting to get an early read from FTA before localities spend a lot of dollars on a project that in the end would not be competitive. And so it was a way of sort of allowing you to have a better idea of where you stand before you continue to invest in the project. After we complete NEPA, then the New Start project formally requests entry into engineering, and it's pretty detailed in terms of what you are required to produce. A governance agreement depending on who the stakeholders are on the project. Technical capacity, meaning that you internally have the capacity to build, operate, and maintain that project, or that you're going to contract that out to somebody else. You have to prepare a financial plan for how we're going to fund the project, both to build it, but operate and maintain it over a 20-year period. So FTA requires you to put together a 20-year financial plan for a project for how you're going to maintain and operate that system over a 20-year period. And so that is the FTA requirements, to have a 20-year financial plan, develop a project management plan in terms of all the third-party agreements. So, some of the corridors cross railroad tracks, to have an agreement with the freight railroads, to have all agreements with utilities, if it's a state road with the FDOT. So other parties that might have a stake in the project, you have to have those agreements in place, and you put those together during the engineering phase. But FTA wants you to have an idea of who they are and who the stakeholders are and what's the status of those conversations before you get into engineering. And as I said earlier, a small start project stays in project development and never enters into this phase, but it completes all of those actions above during preliminary development. And then projects are rated and evaluated. Now, New Start and small start projects are rated and evaluated at different phases. A New Start project is rated and evaluated prior to entry into engineering, is rated again before it gets its grant agreement, and before it is included in the president's budget. Now, depending on the timing of those there may not be additional information necessary to be generated, but depending on the span of time involved in each of those 3 steps, there may be some additional updates to the information you're giving to FTA based on the span of time involved there. For a small start, you're rated and evaluated only at 2 places: inclusion of the president's budget and before you get a small start grant agreement. So they differ a little bit in that respect. These are the ratings that FTA utilizes to evaluate a project. This didn't change under the FAST Act. So the top 6 are 50% of the rating. The bottom 3 are 50% of the rating. You must get a medium on the top 6, taking into account all 6 of the criteria. You must get a medium, taking into account the bottom 3 criteria, to then get an overall project rating of medium or higher to be funded. So each of those must get a medium for you to be able to move forward. So it's important as we're looking at the project corridors, we're looking at competitiveness to see how they'll fare under these individual criteria. And if you want to dive into the details for any of those criteria, I'll be happy to do so, but I'm not going to belabor that now. So this is the process, and this is sort of rinse and repeat. This is the process Congress takes every single year, okay? So for this fiscal year, for projects that were in the president's budget that was announced in February of this year, they began that process in August and September of last year to be rated and evaluated for FT to review the information in the November-December timeframe, to be in a budget that was published the first Tuesday of this year. For now, we're in the midst of that appropriations process for FY17 right now, which is the spring and summertime, with the idea that once Congress completes its action, we'll see when they'll complete it this year, but once they complete the action for FY17, they determine the funding levels, and then your project will be in the president's budget, or you'll be funded by Congress for a fiscal year that starts October 1st of this year. So it's basically it's about a 15-month process from when you formally submit information to when you have money in a budget for a fiscal year. So it's 15 months in advance of when you want to get funding. It's when you request entry in the president's budget, begin that process. And usually FTA will base it on your projects. They will base it on your project schedule. They will base it on how, for New Start projects, you must be in engineering. They'll base it on how much engineer work you've done on your project, and then what issues remain on your project that are unresolved. So I'm working on one project right now that has a reoccurring environmental issue that's coming up that's not allowed the closure of environmental documents to take place. So they had hoped to be in this year's budget, and they were shut out based on what the Senate action took because they weren't ready.
Jeff, Commissioner Bruckner has a question.
When he's finished.
When he's done? Okay, terrific. Go ahead, Jeff.
I think so that process repeats itself, and I think that's it. I think I had one more slide. Okay, just based on my experience, did I have one behind? Yes. Okay, this is where we are for right now. What you see in the map is sort of the projects that are in the president's budget this year. The president proposed $3.5 billion. The Senate only provided $2.33 billion, so not all those projects are going to get funded, and they're not going to get funded at the president's request level. But the one thing I will say to you is that for a full funding grant agreement, Congress always honors the full funding grant agreement. So Congress will honor every one of those full funding grant agreements. So once you get that grant agreement, Congress will provide the funding that's laid out in that grant agreement, and they've been consistently doing so for the last 10, 15 years. So it's like I compare it to Darwinism at its best, that the strong projects survive, and once you get into the president's budget and once you are funded, you pretty much are virtually guaranteed to get in your project. And the only projects that don't get funded is because of something that happens at the local level. A local funding source falls apart, or something happens that prevents that project from going forward, and that's usually at the local level. It's not at the federal level where it falls apart. So as we go forward, as you're going through this process now, the most important thing is trying to develop early stakeholder consensus around the project, because consensus is critical, and building champions for those projects. Once you've identified them out of the feasibility study, who are your champions, who are going to carry these projects, who are going to advocate for them, and those champions can come from elected officials, it can come from the business community, it can come from advocates, but identifying sort of a body of folks that support that project. It's very important to take the time to do public engagement, to really get the public on board, to build strong level of support for a project order that you're taking forward. And more we're seeing folks take advantage of social media to communicate, because we're really seeing the public comment process shifting away from the traditional public meeting to more and more engagement through social media, where that's really where you meet more people and you engage more people through social media these days than you do really through a public meeting. And so that's increasingly the shift as we're seeing projects moving forward, where a strong social media strategy is important. And with that, answer questions.
Commissioner Becker. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Booth, for that.
Commissioner, good to see you again.
Good to see you again, Jeff. A couple of questions. You talked about new starts, small starts, but there's also medium and larger starts. Can you briefly describe what the requirements are for those types of projects?
Well, there's really only 3 eligible programs under the capital investment grants. There's small starts, new starts, and then core capacity. You're not eligible for core capacity at this point, other than, a streetcar project couldn't qualify for core capacity yet.
Okay, well then, next question then. You had mentioned that, if I heard you right, on the new starts, you should have about 50% of that capital set aside for local match, is that right?
That is, if you look at the president's budget and you look at what projects are funded, 50% is now the new normal for being competitive in the program.
What about then on small starts? You mentioned it's capped at 100 million. What's the ideal amount that you want to have set up for a match?
I would say typically what we're seeing for smaller bus rapid transit, smaller in terms of project cost, bus rapid transit projects, those projects are getting 60 to 80% federal share. Once you start getting to a capital cost that begins to crest at 100 million or more, you're beginning to see a greater level of social, local commitment, and certainly as projects, even with the $100 million threshold, because it's $100 million, I'm working on 2 projects, one that's $175 million, and it's only getting $100 million. So by virtue of the cap, they're being forced to overmatch from what if they were competing against a bus rapid transit project that could get 80%. So it's really looking at a capital cost, and FTA is certainly encouraging people to overmatch to be competitive in the program.
So if you had also at that level 50% of your project covered as well, is that a good?
It is good, and the one thing I didn't mention was that Congress also changed the statute for small start. 3 of the 6 criteria are measured against the federal share. So if you drive down the federal share by increasing the state and local match, you can improve your project's competitiveness.
Now, on the operating side, I think when we had our conversation, we're looking at what they're looking at as far as having within a 20-year plan. There are multiple sources of revenue that can go into your plan to actually pay for operating. Is that right?
That's right. All they want you to do is to identify sort of when they look at funding history, where have you historically received your operating funds? What's the strength of that traditional funding source? What capacity exists in that funding source? And if there isn't capacity to both maintain your current system and operate the new system, then they want to identify where you're going to get the additional operating dollars to both maintain the current system as well as operate the expanded system. And then where you find those monies, FTA just wants to be able to see it. It could be a dedicated funding source like a sales tax. It could be general funds. It could be a commitment from any number of sources, but they want to see the strength of that commitment, the history of that commitment, and obviously the strongest commitment is a dedicated funding source, a sales tax or a property tax, where you can go out 20 years and project what that revenue is going to generate. That's the strongest source of operating dollars.
So, I mean, obviously, if you had, a 20-year funding source like the sales tax, that would have been the strongest. But what if you had a shorter time frame of like a 10-year dedicated fund? But say, for instance, you knew that a project was going to cost you to operate it maybe $1 million a year. And within that 10-year funding source, you took that amount for 20 years. And so you took $20 million of that dedicated funding source and you put that into a dedicated trust fund to be able to pay for the operations of that project over a 20-year source. Is that something that would be strongly considered?
I think what FT would want to see, let's just say we've had a history around trust funds in this region, just leave it at that, around the streetcar. Some of us have been around long enough to remember that, okay? So I think FT would want to see if we are going to truly create a lockbox where it's truly dedicated to operating dollars, that's truly dedicated, that there are strict parameters around where that money can be used. And then how is it going to retain its value? So what protections do you have for that funding source that it doesn't lose its value over time? So that what you think it has today, 10 years from now, when you're actually beginning to tap into it, what are going to be your operating costs? What are you doing to insulate that fund or allow it to continue to grow, to be able to maintain the operations of the system? I mean, I would say that, honestly, FTA, that's not going to be their preferred approach. So you're going to have a lot of convincing to do of them that's a strong approach and that you can defend that approach as you talk to the financial management oversight consultant.
But if you have a strong local match of 50% plus for that project, and then you can demonstrate how you can secure that type of funding, then that would be something they would potentially consider.
Yeah, I mean, I'd want to understand how you're going to set that money apart and how you're going to protect it against, shall we say, incursion as future needs arise. Because there'll be a great temptation to be more conservative in terms of what you think you're going to need for operating dollars to tap into that source of funding to sort of meet a current need. And so FTA is going to want to be sure that money actually will be there, that it actually will be enough to operate the system. And, you know, I'd say that will take a fair amount of conversation with FTA to convince them that strategy works.
Okay.
Mr. Roche.
I appreciate your coming here and your presentation. I was looking over the weekend at the FTA's website to see what small start projects have been approved. And the one in Kansas City looked very similar to me to our Metro Rapid. So question I have for you is, I'm not sure how familiar you are with our Metro Rapid East-West, but it's a project that knits together a lot of our routes where a lot of our, it has our highest ridership, routes of highest ridership. Would a project like that qualify for new starts? The only thing I saw in there was perhaps that we didn't plan on weekend service. Is that?
Okay, so first of all, I would say there used to be a program called Very Small Starts before Congress amended the statute in MAP 21 that was based on the Troost Avenue project in Kansas City. So I've ridden the Troost system. It's not dedicated right away. I mean, they have lines on the pavement that demarcate the project corridor. They have enhanced stations with next bus information. They have branding around the bus so that you know that it's different than the rest of the bus surface. And they have a higher level of service in the corridor. And so Kansas City, the next project would be very similar to that. I was just in Kansas City early last month because they just are opening a streetcar line as well in Kansas City, and that actually opens this week. And I would say that the small start to BRT is really the Kansas City projects. I mean, that type of project with essentially defining the corridor, having signage, having signalization so it gets signal preference. So working with your traffic engineers to allow it to have signal preference or priority in the corridor, particularly during peak hour, to have good information, so good next bus information, so people are able to use it and have a scheduled confidence of when the bus is going to come based on the level of service you provide in the corridor. All those things that feed into the small start criteria that would allow it to be considered a corridor-based bus project and eligible for small start monies.
Well, so it sounds like it would qualify.
Yes.
Based on that.
Yeah, I think we'd have to look. I mean, I don't know the numbers in terms of the ridership on those corridors. Typically, the threshold's about 3,000 riders, but FTA now has a new stops model that would be applied to the project corridor that would evaluate sort of the trips in the corridor and determine what are the level of trips, because the level of trips or the passengers you're carrying will also influence the 6 criteria that I showed you earlier in the project justification criteria. Ridership will be key to competitiveness on that side of the equation.
Okay. And as far as, so I know when we accept a federal grant, then we would be liable for continuing that service, or we would have to repay it back. I guess given the useful life of the project. For example, the streetcar, HART would have to repay the $55 million roughly, if we decided for some reason to end it. How would that impact a project like a corridor-based BRT when the useful life of the capital, at least the equipment, the buses, is a 12-year life versus maybe some of the stops and transit signalization might have a longer life? How would that be looked at?
I've had this conversation with FTA because there's another city in which I work that wanted to convert its bus rapid transit system that they had just opened 2 years previously to a potential light rail corridor. And FTA informed them that that project has a 20-year useful life.
Okay.
So once you made that commitment, we're expecting you to keep it in service for 20 years. So once you've made that investment decision, we're expecting to get our life, and we see it as a 20-year useful life for the investment. Now, you're right, the capital assets, like the buses, typically the replacements every 12 years or thereabouts. So you are replacing the bus assets, and The replacement cost is what also gets built into the financial plan for the project. So that's part of maintaining the system, is building that into your financial plan so you have capital cost replacement and rehab of that system built into the operating costs of the budget. So it's not just the payment of operators, but it's also building into that sort of lockbox, if that's the approach chosen, that would allow you to do bus replacement, facility repair and maintenance is all part of the operating plan.
So we could build that into the grant application?
Yeah, the FTA would expect, and when you prepare your financial plan to be included in the president's budget, they would want to see how you're going to build, operate, and maintain that system over a 20-year period.
Right.
So you're going to have to show them how you're going to do that.
Okay, very good. Another question. As far as, so the presentation we had earlier, discussed some of the criteria that FTA is gonna use to rate these projects. And one of the things is return on investment. And I think that's something that I really would like us as an agency to do a good job at, because many times these projects, cost increases, performance underperforms. So even though the FTA only looks at 17%, 16.66% cost effectiveness and 17% congestion relief, that's something that I know I will be looking into. What are they looking at? What is this congestion relief? What is congestion relief in the eyes of FTA?
Well, I would say they're still struggling to figure out how to define congestion relief. So they put a sort of temporary measure in there that just simply looks at ridership in the corridor. They made a change away from what used to be the transportation system user benefits, which was looking at travel time benefits going from travel zone to travel zone and seeing whether how that performed in a project corridor. Now really focused on just simply trips. How many boardings do you have on a project? So a project that picks up a lot of people, and no matter how far they go in that corridor, that's counted as a trip or a boarding. So the distance is not as important as it is, putting the project in the right corridor where it's picking up a lot of people and moving people through that corridor. So the focus is no longer solely on the commute-based trip. It's really trying to capture people throughout the day.
Is that in the eyes of congestion relief to a transit rider, or does it look at all across all modes?
Well, I think at this point, it's only the transit rider. We're not comparing it to an automobile investment. It's simply looking at a transit investment in the corridor and how it does to pick and move people in the corridor.
Okay, and then as far as cost effectiveness, I know the old criteria, I believe, was $15 a trip. It had to get a medium rating or higher. Did that change with the FAST?
It did. In MAP 21, Congress eliminated the requirement for a federally driven alternatives analysis, which was used as the basis. In that process, you were comparing a theoretical baseline against the project you wanted to build and determining how your project compared against that baseline project. Congress eliminated the requirement for the baseline requirement, allowed the localities to develop their own alternatives and to move those forward under the process I outlined in my presentation. So that requirement for developing a baseline was eliminated. The federal requirement for an alternatives analysis was eliminated. It's really leaving it to the locality to determine what process you want to go through to identify your alternatives, to select your locally preferred alternative. That's really your decision as you move, as to how you want to determine a project and move into project development. And then once it gets into project development, then obviously you're keeping an eye on the federal process, because if you're hoping to secure future federal dollars, you want to make sure the project is competitive under the federal criteria.
Okay, so then when the FTA does give that cost effectiveness rating, do we know what that criteria is?
Yeah, it's spelled out. It's spelled out in the guidance, but it's really based a lot on doing a good travel demand model in the corridor. So I assume as part of the feasibility studies, you're moving projects forward. You're looking at the travel demand model. You're looking at how we're going to estimate trips on day of opening for the project, and the FTA really wants to focus on current trips. And then if you want to look at future trips, then basically that gets 50% weight, and current trips get 50% weight. So the idea is to really look at corridors that have ridership today, and then how the project will help increase ridership in that corridor. So it's important to look at corridors that have good service today. And then FTA does have their model that really looks at combination of trips, and they're not as much focused on distance anymore. It's just how many people to get on and off our corridor, given the length of the corridor, how many people get on and off that system during any given day.
So they're not looking at dollar figures, they're looking at ridership.
Yeah, it's all about riders now. I mean, so we're no longer doing a transportation system user benefiting anymore. That is gone. It's just looking at ridership and putting that information into the mobility benefits, and putting that information to develop the environmental benefits. And so it's looking at a broader array of benefits than we used to look at.
Okay, wow. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner White?
How about the metrics on the land use piece?
What they really want to focus on is what is current land use today. So what are the current conditions in terms of zoning, in terms of policies that have been adopted to sort of use the corridor as a spine for future development? So what are you doing today to set up that corridor to sort of prepare for future investment by the private sector in that corridor once you make that federal investment? And then they're looking at what plans and policies have been adopted at the local level to sort of encourage density or to encourage development to take place in the project corridor. So that's what they're looking at. So they're looking at evaluating your land use and looking at your economic development plans for the corridor.
I'm gonna ask you a tough question.
Okay.
I'm a Hillsborough County Commissioner, so I know what I see in Hillsborough, but I think I see it in some of the surrounding counties as well. So if you look at all modes of transportation, mass transit, automobile, bicycle, pedestrian, do you think we can solve our transportation problems if we continue our model of sprawl development in this area, particularly Hillsborough County?
He did say it was a tough question.
You know, I would say this. Number one, you want to continue to grow as a region. And growth brings traffic, right? So the issue is how do you manage that growth? And looking at, okay, what's the capacity that we have in our road network to accommodate that capacity with that additional use of the network? And so the issue that a lot of communities are facing is, okay, there's a theoretical maximum number of people, even with the investment in technology and a highway corridor, that we can fit into that corridor. And so people are beginning to look at alternatives for how do I meet that future capacity need, and looking at making investments such as transit as a way to sort of absorb some of that capacity that is currently not possible or maybe less expensive than the alternative of investing in a freeway, to sort of absorb that capacity as a region grows. And so my response is that I think that's being faced by regions all around the United States, is they're wrestling with that issue. And they're seeking to solve it in a lot of different ways. Transit, they're looking at trying to do better metrics to provide information to highway users, to sort of, as they travel the corridor, to give them better information about their trip, to sort of help make decisions about how they want to travel. But I think there is only a certain point where you can absorb that capacity, where that capacity has to be absorbed by some other investment. And then it's also, you know, not to get too controversial here, but it's also tied to your land use decisions. And as you grow, and what assumptions you're making about that growth and where that growth is going to take place, what decisions are you prepared to make about what incentives or what encouragement, or where do we want that growth to take place so that the network can best serve that growth? So that we, as we're making those investment decisions that we're allowed as development occurs, where do we want that development to occur, and how can we ensure that the network that we've created can serve that growth? Because I think historically, a lot of regions have been found that we have a development that takes place, and then the transportation network has to catch up to that investment, because not enough consideration was given to the transportation impacts of that investment before that investment was made to allow that growth to take place.
Theoretically speaking, if a county like Hillsborough were to begin discussions, say in workshop formats, with the idea of retooling or perhaps even overhauling our land use policy, do you think it would be a good idea to bring a transportation consultant to the table?
Absolutely. I think if you're going to do that, and you're beginning to look at your land use for the county, and you're looking at, okay, you know we're going to grow. So the issue is, where should that growth take place, or what can we do in the way of decisions made by the county to sort of shape that growth? You want to encourage transportation to be part of that. In fact, the federal law that was passed in MAP 21 allows you, as part of the MPO process, to do scenario planning. And scenario planning is just basically a way of taking certain growth assumptions or growth scenarios, and then looking at, okay, as we build into that model, we're looking at, okay, where are those people gonna work? Where are they gonna live? What's the network we have in place? And what are different investment decisions that we can make to serve that growth, so that we can plot out scenarios. Okay, what is the level of investment that we need to make in transportation to serve that growth? Scenario planning, which is allowed to be done under MAP 21, is one way to sort of plot out that future and to begin to help shape decision makings as you look at the transportation impacts of those decisions.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else before I go to Commissioner Beckner for a second, Ron? Anyone else before him? Commissioner?
So it sounds like to me, Jeff, to sum it up from what I'm hearing, you were really communities that develop very successful transportation plans and are able to grow with their population do two things. Number one, the community and the governing bodies are willing to invest in those systems, and combination with good land use decisions, then you tie those together, then that is really the recipe for a successful transit system in the future.
I mean, it's no accident that Denver and Salt Lake and Portland and those cities have grown the way they have.
Yep.
And they've grown the way they have, and they've been able to accommodate that growth through dedicated funding, through decisions around land use and transit investment to accommodate that growth. And so you look at those regions, there's a recipe for success there that those regions have been able to capture, and you know, especially Salt Lake, they had an Envision Utah plan. You'd think a very conservative community like Utah, but they had an Envision Utah plan that really became the foundation for the region's growth, to really realize what, in their case, they had geographical considerations. They had two mountain ranges and a lake in the middle that sort of directed where their growth was going to take place, and they realized we're going to continue to have air quality issues if we don't figure out how to accommodate our growth.
Yep.
And so they made a decision to make very clear transportation investment decisions, recognizing that that was their future and that they were going to be growing, and they could only put those people in so many places because of their geographic constraints. And so they made a concerted plan to make that investment, and it was a public process of informing decision makers. And you know, it wasn't without its hiccups. I mean, the original light rail line was at times very controversial, but once they opened the light rail line, they've had successful votes ever since to allow them to expand the light rail system. So, you know, I think you can look at Salt Lake as an example of a community that, you know, went through its struggles, but then because they had a plan and they had a sales tax, they are who they are today because of those decisions.
They didn't get there through pure budget cuts. They got there because they dedicated.
They identified a sales tax, and they passed that sales tax that's allowed them to make long-term investment decisions. And I will say this as I talk to communities around the United States, if you look at the planning process for a Salt Lake, a Denver, a Portland, you know, Dallas, other cities, Charlotte, you know, those decisions were put in place 20 plus years ago. And the combination of planning 20 plus years ago, identifying a dedicated sales tax, allowed them to make long-term investment decisions. So the systems, if you go to those cities today that you see today, didn't happen yesterday. Those decisions began, and those systems began to get put in place 20, 25 years ago. And so that's really the process as you're looking at the future of Hillsborough counties. The decisions you make today matter, because they will influence the region for the next 20, 25 years. So it's important to make decisions today knowing that you're setting a course for the next 20, 25 years.
Commissioner Miller?
I think you answered my question, but let me ask it again. When you're talking about looking at the transportation decisions in the future and land use issues for some of those cities like Salt Lake, Denver, Phoenix, for example.
Yes.
Charlotte, even north of Virginia.
Yes.
When they made those commitments, for how long a period of time? When they started out, how long a period of time they made those commitments?
Hey, I'll separate Norfolk from the rest because I actually worked on the Norfolk project. So most of those places began a planning process that began 20 plus years ago, and then they were able to adopt a sales tax. So all of them have a dedicated funding source.
And how long were those sales taxes dedicated?
Minimum 20 years, some are in perpetuity, but all of them have to be 20 years from the FTA standpoint. I mean, that's what FTA expects when you're putting together a financial plan, and many of them are renewed that sales tax. Based on the success of building out the system, they've been able to then justify to the voters additional sales tax monies Like Phoenix just got done passing an $8 billion sales tax referendum for investments within the city of Phoenix based on the success of Valley Metro and the increase in bus service that was provided by Phoenix. So they just got done in August of approving a large sales tax measure. Norfolk's a bit of an anomaly in the sense that Norfolk and the Norfolk region, it's all general fund contributions from the local governments who are part of the regional transportation system. So it's really a general fund commitment by each of the regions, and each of them has to make the capital investment decisions for their cities, as opposed to having a dedicated sales tax. Now, the state did adopt a statewide gas tax and a regional gas tax, and they have the ability now to potentially go to the voters for a regional gas tax that will allow them to make those long-term investment decisions. But the Norfolk project was really built by the city of Norfolk, using its local dollars, local capital dollars, and then taking some state money to match the local dollars to help come up with the local share for that project.
But overall, those cities that we named, excluding Norfolk, how they did theirs, they did it progressive, looking forward, going to the public, saying, we need those dollars, here's our plan, because we're gonna be progressive enough to handle growth and handle the land use issue that we're talking about. We need those dollars.
Yes, and so yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Oh, Mr. Melendez, and then I'll go with Mr. Melendez first, and then you, Commissioner White. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Booth, thank you very much for a great presentation. Quick question, what is the federal perspective on supportive infrastructure relative to a New Start or Small Start project? You know, just a quick broad brush.
So define for me what you mean by supportive infrastructure.
Sure. Let's say, you know, ASCE, for example, the American Society of Civil Engineers, they have a report card, a national report card, and they have it, you know, by city. I know that there's an engineering component that Mr. Fogarty, you know, pointed out in the process. I guess my question is, how much of the supportive infrastructure, sidewalks, roads,
Right, okay.
bridges, how much of that is analyzed or evaluated in the New Start, Small Start process?
Okay, so FTA will look at the envelope of the project, and they'll make a capital investment to see, are you, in terms of what you want as a federally eligible expense, they'll look at, okay, what is necessary for that project to take place. So if you need to rebuild a sidewalk for a bus platform, that they'll cover that. If you think Kansas City repaved the street to provide the bus a smoother ride to make it more comfortable for bus users, so they were able to pay for the repaving of the street. But at the end of the day, that street's owned by the city or by the county or by the state, depending on the jurisdiction you're in. So the maintenance really falls to that jurisdiction to maintain the street. The capital cost really falls to the local government, unless working with the local government, they're willing to make that investment decision. In the case of Charlotte, another project I've worked on and been involved in the region for almost 15 years, with the South Line project, their initial rail line, the city went ahead of the project and relocated South Boulevard to move it to sort of open up the corridor for development. They redid all the sidewalks in advance of the project. They moved utilities in advance of the project to sort of reduce the cost of the project, because in those days, those dollars would have counted toward the project, would have made it less competitive, because now you're driving up the capital cost. And so I think that's always the consideration. If we can get, if we know we're going to look at a project corridor, we're going to make an investment in that corridor, and there's also going to be a decision to make transportation investments in the corridor, it's good to make those either in concert or to take actions in the corridor, such as utility relocation. If you're moving utilities in the county or the city, or you're in a reinvestment plan, if you could move those out of the way, out of a future corridor, that takes some of the capital cost off of the New Start or Small Start project and takes care of those in advance of the project being done. So that's going to be all part of the process. And I think what FTA wants to see is obviously you've got to have to build stations. And the type of station you have for a Small Start project is different than you have for a New Start project in terms of the investment in that station. For a bus rapid transit project, it's pretty much a enhanced bus shelter, you know, that provides protection to the users, provides ADA access, provides next bus information, and defines the corridor in terms of branding purposes, so people know that that's a different type of service than the sort of, you know, the daily bus service, that this is something different than the rest of the bus system. And they'll expect you to make those capital investments, but maintenance of the street really falls to the jurisdiction that owns that street.
Okay, so just in a nutshell, how does FTA evaluate the quality of that supportive infrastructure?
I don't think to evaluate the quality of this one, look, you should put in together what's the scope of your project, who's going to pay for that, and whether it's in the scope or outside of the scope of the project. But what they do want to see depending on what you're talking about. If we're talking about a bus rapid transit project, we're looking at who's gonna pay for the station platforms, who's gonna pay for the shelter, what have you. Typically, that becomes a project expense because the bus is requiring, either rebuild of the sidewalk or the placement of that platform. For a light rail project or streetcar project, typically the streetcar will pay for the street improvements, and then it's all function, are we paying curb to curb, or building front to building front, in the corridor, depending on, from an engineering standpoint, what needs to be done in that corridor, and the proposed treatment of that project in the corridor, if it's dedicated right away, or whether it's a streetcar running on the side lane, and so those are all decisions that are made as you're looking at your project. You're taking it through the environmental process, and you're looking at, from an engineering standpoint, what investments need to be made to help our project achieve what is set out in the federal application to achieve in terms of ridership, travel time, what have you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Commissioner White?
Well, here comes another tough one. But we all have to be intellectually honest here.
Stop asking tough questions, Commissioner White.
So we all have to be intellectually honest here. Would it be a true statement to say that our region has failed to take that critical first step of taking a hard look at land use policy, and that really that's the starting point before we talk about, or go back to talking about any new taxes?
So you're asking me to venture where angels don't dare to tread?
You can fly away.
Fade off.
I think successful regions need to make those decisions, and I will simply make this statement, that as we look at where investment's going from the private sector, and looking at who those private sector employers want to employ, and where those people are moving to, it's no accident that talent is going to certain cities. And it's no accident that employers that want to employ that talent are going to those cities as well. And if you look at what those employers look for in that community, a key consideration to attract the workforce and attract those employers is a strong transit investment. It's no accident when you look at where capital's going and where investments are being made by employers, where they're making those investments. And I think that's something that every region, as you're looking at, as we are now in a chase for talent, we're chased for employers, and we're in a competition with other regions to look at your peer regions and seeing what are they doing, what can we learn from them that we can bring back that we need to do to be competitive. Did I dodge that one pretty good?
Good answer.
Mr. Roach?
Yeah, just one other thing after hearing your presentation. Actually, I'm glad Mr. Fogarty is still in the room, because what I'm hearing is the FTA is not really looking at cost effectiveness. Therefore, in the feasibility study that we're about to write a scope for, I hope we can include something in there that will look at cost per trip and kind of do an analysis across the different modes.
I just want to make a comment about that, because there was a reason Congress changed the statute. You need to understand the reason why. The reason why is that we're going to cost effectiveness and travel time savings, we are leading to bad investments. We're leading to investments that cause transit stations to be moved from transit-dependent populations who would be most served by that transit investment. Look at Minneapolis. They were going to remove 3 stations on the Green Line extension to St. Paul that basically who didn't get served with the underserved populations who were the most transit-dependent in the region. The travel time savings led to that decision. And what we also became to see is that we were putting projects in corridor. We wondered then why ridership wasn't achieved, because we were putting projects in corridor where people didn't live. They didn't work. And so the change in the cost effectiveness criteria was to shift the transit investment to a corridor where there is development, where people do live, where they do work, where they do want to travel to. And so the focus is now rider boardings and not travel time savings analyzed at a quantitative level at the cost per rider, because that led us to bad outcomes. And so Congress, and this is a Republican Congress that made that decision, to change the statute to shift away from that to a new measure that got rid of the baseline alternative and focused on riders and boardings as the measure for cost effectiveness, because at the end of the day, aren't we in transit about carrying people?
Right, so there is that relationship between ridership and cost per trip. And I see what happened though with Sunrail. They waived the cost effectiveness of that, and our cost per trip is $38 a trip, and the ridership is well below their first year projections. But I'm just saying, in our initial study, before we ever get to the FTA process, we need to have some objective data to be able to look at that. And I totally am with you on serving the transit dependent. That needs to be first and foremost. You know, and I actually think that by having that criteria, it will help us to make a decision better in that process. But you had mentioned that it was up to the locals
Yeah, you,
to look
in
at
the
that.
AA process, or the process you're beginning now,
Yeah.
you decide the parameters about
Yes.
how you're gonna evaluate projects and what you're gonna bring forward as your local referrals.
Absolutely.
That's entirely within your control now, and FTA will not tell you how to do that.
Right, and so I appreciate that information because I just wanted to make sure that we put that in the scope because
Fair
that's
enough.
where we do have the control and that will help us to make that analysis.
Fair enough.
So, yeah,
Yes.
we're on the same wave.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments for Jeff? Jeff, thanks so much for your information. By the way, his contact information was included in the presentation. I would encourage all of you, especially our elected officials, to contact him and talk to him about some of these very specific questions. He is an excellent advocate for us, but in addition, really knows the landscape on the federal government. And, you know, you can have a 2-hour conversation with Jeff, and you will come away knowing a little bit more. He knows everything, but we only know a little bit of what he is able to relay to us. Thank you, Jeff. We really appreciate it. All right, next up is Mr. Begley. He is going to talk about staycation, our ridership numbers for that, and that'll be under ridership under the next presentation.
Good morning. Justin Begley, HART planning staff. I just have a brief update for you on the staycation program. And as it comes up here, I'll just, here we go. Start off with a bit of a brief background on staycation. We're actually coming into we're actually currently in our 7th year of staycation. Staycation is a free rider program for students, middle school, high school age students. All they have to do to ride a HART vehicle is show or flash their student ID, and we'll go ahead and get them a ride. Our bus operators record those in our fare box to make sure we track them. Those rides can be taken on the majority of our services, all of our local service, which is largely the service we provide, as well as the Metro Rapid and the neighborhood flexes. So essentially, if you're a student, middle school, high school age, during the month of spring break, every year, which has changed a little bit over the year. It used to be April, now it's March, but we track the program, bring it in during that month of spring break. You can ride for free. This year, which is the 7th year here in 2016, we are extending the pilot. We're actually now out of spring break month. We're into our next month in April. The extension's going for about almost 2.5 extra months. So we and the school board can both evaluate how this is going to go forward and take the pilot to its next step. This chart here shows the month-over-month or year-over-year performance of staycation based on the month that it was employed, going back to 2010 when it began. And I do want to point out that there's a little bit of a dip in the trend there, but we actually have done onboard surveys which measure all of our ridership, and we talk to our riders during those. And during that same time frame, what you see there, that trend mirrors a little bit about what our ridership has, what we've learned about it through our onboard surveys, and that we've trended since, I think it was 2009 or 2010, a bit older in our riders, and fewer of the riders have identified themselves as students. So what you see there is probably just a larger reflection of the trend in our ridership as a whole. But you can see coming into 2016, we've really rebounded with this program. And largely, there's awareness efforts and marketing campaign that's been renewed on that front. To drill down a little bit on that last column in that previous chart, if we take that month of performance and break it out, month of March, almost the entire month of April, you can see the program is actually gaining steam as we go forward. Month over month week over week for the last 6 weeks, it's steadily increased, and that's really what we're happy to see. I just want to conclude this by stating, in order to put this pilot out there, there's been ongoing dialogue with the school board, and that same dialogue is what led to the extension of this pilot. And we are also just kicked off a meeting as part of the working group with the school board, so we can learn a bit more about what transportation issues each, both the school board and HART have, as well as, once we learn about each of what we do, then there's greater opportunities for coordination going forward. So we hope what we see here in staycation continues, that growth, as well as we have these additional opportunities to coordinate with them. That really just wraps up that update.
Okay. Commissioner Becker? What are the, never mind. Well, you had the weekly from 18, so if we put all the Aprils together, then is that gonna, we're looking to have, to exceed what we had before?
Yes.
That is an excellent question, Commissioner Beckner. Actually, this morning, Finance sent out an email that last week we recorded over 18,000 trips on this promotion. So by my handy math, the last 4 weeks, or the 4 weeks mostly in April, we had over 69,000 trips.
69,000 trips?
Yes, sir. And so once we tack on those few days in April we don't have in there, that's over 70,000.
Wow, 70,000.
Absolutely. So it is, I think it's clearly time to sit back down with our friends at the county and Hillsborough County Schools and say, how do we turn this into something clearly in use? How do we put a price tag on that and make this year round? We even start talking about, for future summers, it's not just kids going to parks, it's kids going to these nutrition programs. It's definitely time to say, we've seen kids will use it, how do we make this a permanent thing?
Do you have the estimates as far as how much this promotion costs HART, so we have an idea of what the baseline cost is to operate such a program?
It's an incremental cost. At this point, we have not introduced any new service, so we can't say, here's a trip on bus route X. But an incremental cost, if we go back through our whole budget and take it down per passenger, we can come up and say, here is a portion of the budget to defray additional maintenance, for instance, at bus stops and on the vehicles. Each passenger is, albeit a short window, it is additional dwell time at a bus stop, so we can start looking at those incremental costs. And that's where we would land for probably a 25 to 50, anywhere from 25 to 50 cents per passenger that we would see an actual impact operationally. And so if our planning group has not been working on it, you've been voluntold. So we'll be working on it very quickly.
And the reason why I bring that up is part of my vision, the way I would see this program is we talked about it's twofold. It's to help kids and parents with their current transportation needs, but also to start building the culture of transportation and the use of our services in our county. So we would need to make sure that certainly we want to try to cover some of our costs, but also understand that the ideal principle moving forward is try to change the culture. So I would look at that as an investment in doing so.
So being a good neighbor, but being a good neighbor, taking care of our own assets too.
Correct.
Covering our assets, as it were. Yes, sir. We will, we'll have that put together.
Commissioner Murray.
Thank you very much. Catherine, we have talked a lot about the USF, the Hillsborough Community College, and now we have our public schools. And I think we need to take a big picture look at the whole thing. How do we get students to school? Whether they're middle, high, in Hillsborough Community College or USF or even University of Tampa. How can we really give them good service or develop some kind of program? And that's why I'd like for you to come back to us and try to give us the big picture and see what we can develop that will go long term.
Okay, is that a motion, Commissioner?
That is a motion.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second for our CEO to come back with some solutions for a total look at the program. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Anything else? Any other questions or comments? Mr. Becker. Ms. Bowers.
Yes, we had talked some time ago of looking into a program that we're doing in Polk County and working with the school system that we would help children get to school before and after the school hours using the bus system. Well, have we did anything else on that? Are you familiar with that?
Yes, sir. That's actually the second phase of this program. A point of distinction with our friends in Polk County, who are, of course, doing an excellent job. They are covering about twice their square mileage, about 2,000 square miles, and cover about 20% of the passenger activity we do. So they have very different constraints that they're looking at. They have either the fortune or misfortune, depending on how you look at it. Their buses are a little emptier in rush hour. So one of their strategies has been to move those buses to places that make sense for the schools, but keep them on the right side of some of these federal transit conversations. We don't have that opportunity. During rush hour, every single one of our buses are working. So what we are looking at is how can we make sure that it's easier for students to use that, and then as we get to the fringes of rush hour, so perhaps, a student getting out at 6 p.m., right? How do we make sure a bus that potentially is coming back to the garage is hitting that school to bring them back in the network? And as we discussed with Hillsborough County Schools, we would be working with them over the summer with their location data, their GIS, so they can say, kids from here are going there, and we can go to that next step of saying, we're gonna bring a bus back in a particular course. It will be 15 minutes more service. The school district will pay us for those 15 minutes, and we're lining up to where those students don't have an option with the yellow bus. So that is the second phase of this program, but we are continuing to work with them. And clearly when the student, we love it for the ridership, but from a community perspective, when that student can get home from an activity or get to a different school, it's not just impacting that student's life, that parent now doesn't have to make end-of-day decisions contingent on getting their kid to do different things. So we see a bunch of benefits for that, and we'll keep you posted as we have something more concrete to bring back.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Begley. We have 3 action items on the agenda. They are in your book, tab 2A, B, and C. If you'd like, I think we can do it as a group. If anyone would like to make a motion. I have a motion to approve. I have a second of that. Please indicate if you are in favor by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much. Next up.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Before you go forward, we have another action item that was not on the agenda. We have a resolution that this board approved in January for a funding program with FDOT for a JPA, Joint Participation Agreement. The amount of the funding pursuant to the resolution 2016-0101 was $4,896,253. For reasons that I think someone is here to explain, that number has been changed by the DOT to $4,590,040. It's a reduction in the amount we thought, but your resolution approved the larger amount and authorized the JPA to be entered into pursuant to that larger amount. So we need to correct that by having a resolution that authorizes the acceptance of the lower amount and entered into a JPA pursuant to that lower amount.
Can we do it under one resolution then, just a motion for the resolution to change?
I think you can have a motion to that effect, and we can prepare the resolution and have it signed by you, because you'll have the authority to do so.
Jeff, did you have anything to add to that, or?
I do the reason. Good morning, Jeff Seward, Chief Financial Officer. Something that we need to start putting into the original resolutions and the JPAs that come before the board is that those are preliminary amounts provided by the state of Florida, and they can go up or down. Never gone up, but they can fluctuate prior to the final numbers coming in. So that's what happened. The numbers changed from what we originally thought they would be to what Mr. Smith has requested that you approve today.
Move approval.
I have a motion to move the approval of that resolution. I have a second. I have a question from Mr. Rowe.
Yeah, I would like a little bit more of an explanation how this could impact our budget or our service that we're providing. Does this have any impact?
That's a very good question. I'll be happy to look at that and get back to you, knowing that I found out the numbers have changed over the weekend. So.
Okay, so I know it doesn't, I mean, it's not like we're gonna be able to change that number, but I just, I would like that report back, but this time I'll go ahead and support the motion.
Okay, terrific. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. All right, next up on our agenda is the chair's report. Obviously, I had been absent for 2 meetings. Thank you very much, Mr. Roach, for chairing the meetings while I was gone. Couple things. One is I was up in D.C. During, we go to the League of Cities at that time, but I also went to the Department of Transportation to talk about our regional fare box program. We do have an excellent shot of getting those dollars through the federal government in order to provide that kind of regional mobility. We had a great meeting. I hope that when the dollars are announced, that we do have that to share with PSTA. We are the lead on that. I think that we have shown quite a bit. It's changed significantly since we asked for it previously, and I think we've got an excellent shot at getting that. In addition, we are always looking at ways that we can keep improving our service and find ways to actually help pay for that. And we appreciate the staff, especially Cesar Hernandez, who went with me, in addition to our lobbyists at Holland and Knight, did a great job of presenting it to not only the Department of Transportation, to all the delegation that represents us in DC. So we had a good trip, and I thought that it was very productive. Chief Executive's report. Ms. Egan?
As Councilman Suarez mentioned, our TICA grant application went in last week, and I think we have a collective sigh of relief, but also boo from the staff. It's an awful lot of work. We had, I don't even know how many letters of support. We had our county commission, Pinellas County Commission, Tampa City Council, municipalities in our county, our federal delegation, our state delegation, and many letters of support from Pinellas County as well. So we are guardedly optimistic, and Cesar, I think we will be going back to DC to talk to our friends at DOT to answer questions and reassure this is truly a regional project. So we are excited about that. We are also working on our ISO 14001 certification. Remember, this is the highest level of international certification for environmental stewardship. We will be the first transit agency in Florida to receive the certification. Just an awful lot of work going into that, but fundamentally changing the way that we do business. But also, when we talk to folks, and it's not just a millennials thing, folks' attitudes about the environment are changing. It's a neat thing to do. It's, okay, you must be doing that. It's a course of doing business. So we're very happy to be ahead of that. We also will be kicking off our first mile, last mile pilot project, which still needs a cool name, around the September-October timeframe. We have identified our zones around the University area, Incubation area, Brandon, and the Northdale area for our targets for that. This will be the first program in the country like this where a transit agency brings the rideshare technology in-house. We did, of course, have a couple rideshare companies bid on this. They were more expensive than the vendor that ended up winning our contract. This gives us the ability to be very flexible and dynamic, but ensuring the benefits of transit, which is we guarantee a vehicle will be there, we guarantee your fare, we guarantee it will be accessible, and we guarantee you don't need a smartphone to use it. Well, our friends from DOT are here. Hello, Ming and Ed. Thank you for the grant to make that program possible, as well as a premium transit feasibility study. Just a few notes on on-time performance. We clocked in April at 83%. That is, I believe, our highest month of on-time performance to date. We still have room for improvement, but it is gratifying to see how far we've come. We had a 95% on-time arrival for paratransit last month. So if you are using us to go to work, one day out of the month, we did not get you there on time. The other 19 days we did. In a transit universe, 95% sounds great. For me as an individual, late one day to work is not acceptable, so we continue to work on this. We also, within our paratransit scheduling, have implemented dynamic rescheduling Saturdays and Sundays. So instead of doing a schedule the day before and then cobbling it together as the day changes, we're still using our software to optimize. We'll introduce that for weekdays, and we anticipate getting to a point that your trip to work is shorter. You know exactly when it's coming to get you, and you get there on time. So we're excited about that. The board had directed us back in January to start looking at having an event, a workshop. Just a few things in transportation have been moving around at the same time, so it's been a little challenging to pin down an agenda and a date, but we are settling on Dump the Pump Day, which is June 16th, if I'm correct. Looking at some venues in downtown to have a convergence of what's going on with all our transportation projects, what's happening regionally, what's happening locally, so it gives you more details and start saving places on your calendar. And I would be remiss if I did not ask our friends from DOT, you have made the long trip from Tallahassee. Would you like to speak to us today? No pressure, you don't have to.
Good, thanks.
Okay. All right, Ed, thank you so much. And with that, I will conclude my report.
Okay, thank you so much. Obviously, on items 3, 4, and 5 are your usual status reports and reports from all the other boards that we have. If there are no other questions about those boards, is there any old business or new business from our board members? Mr. Melendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Tom Rask spoke earlier during the public comment, and related to his comments, I just wanted to let everyone know that It's not often that a constituent approaches you and makes a specific request. I know that there's been old business before us, some material submitted, and in the past, I've voiced that I rely on, first on our council to come to some guidance or a decision. But in honor of Mr. Rath's request to me, to kind of put the issue to bed of the question of the Attorney General opinion, I wanted to let everyone know that at our next board meeting, I intend to look at the material again, and based upon and then possibly talk to Mr. Smith, and potentially just kind of put the issue to bed and ask for a motion for a vote, or I may come to the conclusion that one isn't needed, and I would justify my position in that case. But I just, again, it's not often that a citizen, comes down and presents information, and he's made the trip, and I don't necessarily advocate any one position or the other, but I just want to honor his request. So just want to let you know that.
All right. Mr. White and Commissioner White.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask that that's published on the agenda as a discussion item by a board member?
Okay, that's perfectly fine. I don't think we have to do a motion on that, so we just put it as part of the agenda for next month. Okay, thank you. All right, at this part of the meeting, we do ask for any kind of public comment, general public comment. Right now, we have Mr. Gary Floyd is first. Sir, if you come to the microphone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And board members, Gary Cloyd with Connect Tampa Bay. As the city, county, and HART move forward after Wednesday's decision, it is my intent to promote the pilot ferry service project that was talked about at a January Board of County Commissioners meeting, if I remember right. And as that progresses, it gives HART a chance to promote the in-town trolley, increase service, and promote the streetcar. And then that transit feasibility study will allow HART to buy some time to find out if the CSX rail project might come into play at that particular time. If you promote that ferry service project, that will allow you to find out how much congestion relief of all the bridges that everybody talks about. Going to a Rays game, you promote people going to a Lightning game. All of a sudden, the topic doesn't become rail right away. It becomes, how does Tampa improve itself through the ferry system that Commissioner Merman has been talking about for months. Once you start that ferry system, you have created a real monster in this town, and you will have people all over the country talking about it. That's the idea. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next up is Mr. Daniel Silva. Mr. Silva?
Good morning, board. My name is Daniel Silva. I'm the ATU president, local 1593. And we came here to talk about employee morale. And this is one of the topics that we wish you guys to look more into that. Morale at HART is the lowest because of the way employees are being treated. Employees are afraid to speak up. They're afraid of retaliation. They're afraid of doing anything. So that's what we hear, and because they know that the violations of the grievance process is not working. Any complaints that we do is being thrown down by certain employers. But we would like you guys to look into that more closely.
Mr. Silva, if I could,
Yes,
if I believe if you're talking about union employees, there is a grievance process for union employees. Have you contacted your ATU attorney to make sure that that is known to our legal department?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
But as you can see, if we get 10 grievances put on today, only one being heard, that's an issue.
Okay. Is that, have you talked to your attorney about this being part of your contract or,
Yes,
or
sir.
changing the way things are? Terrific. If I could, I'll ask our legal department, Mr. Smith, if we could come back with a report next month about those particular processes and grievances so that we can take a look at it as a board.
Will do.
All right. Thank you, Mr.
One
Silva.
more point, sir.
Yes, of course, I apologize.
we have maintenance problems that will affect pull-outs and the service in the public out there as well.
Okay, terrific. Well, we will definitely, if we could, have our CEO come back with that information also, in terms of maintenance and for our regular report.
Yes, sir, we will. We've improved the miles between failures. Next month's report will reflect that our April data, and if Jim Fetzer is back there as well, I think we've actually turned around almost at a 50% improvement from month to month. Definitely from where the year started, but we will touch base and confirm that what we're seeing in the numbers and what our folks are seeing on the floor are not different situations.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Soto, I appreciate it. Next up, we have Mr. Tom Rask. Did he leave? Well, Henry, I know you want to speak, so why don't you come on up? I don't think Mr. Rask is here now. Go ahead, sir.
Good morning, everybody. How you doing, Mr. Suarez?
Very good.
Kind of missing for
Say your
2
name
weeks.
for the record, though, so we know.
Okay, I Henry Spells. Okay, I'm here to talk to y'all about, experience I had on the river, and I had fun. I had fun 2 weeks ago because I went to Push Nation, and when I noticed I was at the convention center, I was like, okay, I'm kind of a little bit far away from where Route 19, Route 8, and and I was that close to the streetcar, but I don't know where the streetcar was. So I decided to go back and watch a little bit of boats, and where I decided to ask a boat captain if I could get a ride back up to Curtis Hickson. So he asked me to go talk to the taxi guy, but that when I asked the taxi driver for the to get a lift back up to Curtis Hickson, he kind of they said the fare was $15, so I was like, So I went back to the guy on the boat, so he gave me a ride around the bay, back up into the Hillsborough River. And when I was, when we docked at the Hillsborough River, I was talking to another boater about, how the buses and the streetcar and stuff worked. And he made me think. Now, I'm gonna show y'all something. Now, I have something in my pocket. Okay, that falls. Okay, this is my 31-day bus pass, and it costs $15 to ride the boat. Now, Miss Egan, I have now Miss Egan and everybody who works at HART. Now, with this bus pass, I could get on the bus. Now, I was thinking if y'all could connect with the water taxis and make it more accommodatable for people who have these bus passes to be able to, want to go ride on the water. Because, I think riding on the water is fun, and telling how I had fun riding the tour boat going around Davis Island and out out into the bay. I had the most wonderful time ever. And then as I came back around, we came back up and they went back up the Hillsborough River just to drop me off at Curtis Hickson Park. Oh yeah, by the way, Mr. Suarez, get on those guys to clean under them drawbridges because it's kind of dirty. Yeah, but I really want to see if we could use our HART passes on the boats, the taxi boats.
Well, Mr. Spells, we can look into that. That is a private entity. It isn't part of a public transportation system itself. So we can find out if they'd be willing to partner with us. There's no problem with us looking at that. We'd be glad to do that.
It'd be the best thing. Oh, and I just figured I'd say that, but I had a wonderful time doing that. Oh, can you not play hide and seek with me no more? Because I kind of miss you for the past 2 weeks.
I apologize for not being here.
You're the best councilman ever. I can't believe you had to go. And
I think there's 6 other people that might have a disagreement with you about that. But
about what? You being the best councilman?
Thank you, Mr. Spells. I really appreciate it. Is there anyone else in the public that'd like to speak at this time? I see no one. If there is no other comments from our board, we are adjourned. Thank you.